Hey guys, it's Scott with Scottie B Cards, and in this video, I want to talk about how you can make money when others have recency bias. Before we start, if you are a sports card, trading card, baseball card fan, then this is the channel for you. We post 2 to 3 times every week exclusively about sports card and baseball card content, so make sure that subscribe button and that like button so you don't miss anything. So recency bias. I actually used Wikipedia as a source here for the definition. Recency bias is a cognitive bias that favors recent events over historic ones, a memory bias. Recency bias gives greater importance to the most recent event, such as the final lawyer's closing argument a jury hears before being dismissed to deliberate. How much like our market does that sound like? How often are we paying so much money for all these prospects and young players that basically haven't proved much? But I'm not talking about that exactly. That's kind of like beating a dead horse at this point, because I think everybody, including myself, talks about that. But I want to talk about the opposite. Us forgetting players who in the moment might not be perfect, but in the past they've been historic. And on top of that, players who've had bad stretches, all these different things. I'm going to show some graphs and kind of who you should target and why and how you should target these people. So one thing I want to point out is just this bottom line. It says, when it comes to investing, recency bias often manifests in terms of direction or momentum. It convinces us that a rising market or individual stock will continue to appreciate, or that a declining market or stock is likely to keep falling. This bias often leads us to make emotionally charged choices, again, very similar to our market, decisions that could erode our earnings potential by tempting us to hold the stock for too long or pull out too soon. So yeah, let's just say, we have a bull market right now and we're like, it's never going to go down. It's never going to go down, like the housing market in 2008, and of course it goes down. Or the housing market 2008, it's never going to recover. I'm never going to put money into stocks at this low because it's not going to recover, and then you miss the boat. Same concept. Recency bias makes the moment feel much more important than any historical events. So let's talk about it in terms of baseball cards and why it's important. So how does this impact sports cards? We tend to believe if a player is playing bad now, they are always bad. If a player has a bad stretch in the moment, the past is completely thrown out the window and the future is all negative. It means that everything from now on is going to be bad. That's a very common theme. Mike Trout was hurt, and now Mike Trout's back and he's playing great. There are concerns about his injury, which is why his cards aren't spiking like crazy. But I think a lot of the bias, if Mike Trout was hurt then, he was hurt the year before, so that means he's not going to be good ever again. He looks great. Probably just as good, if not better than ever. His OPS plus right now is currently higher than it's ever been. It's been 15 games, so it's hard to say. But the point remains, we all kind of missed out on some buying opportunities because of this. Some players naturally decline as they age. That's the natural thing. It's not the Barry Bonds special secret stuff formula that makes you play good forever, but people get bored, collectors get bored and move to the next hot player. We see that with Franco, Witt, Rodriguez. They're all great and they all could have great earnings potential, but at the point right now is they're the all new hot player. We're moving out of players like, let's say, Adrian Beltre, moving out of Clayton Kershaw, moving out of Albert Pujols. All these players are being forgotten. And you can even look at Lindor, Correa, Manny Machado, Nolan Arenado. All of those players we're forgetting about for these younger players. These cards will appreciate, and when they do, the people who bought the dip will win. We've seen this, and I will show this in just a second. Hall of Fame players play worse towards the end of their career. They're no exception. They might had a really high peak, and they might just get worse and worse and worse and decline, and they might not have as bad of a decline as the average player, but they are going to look worse. And when that happens, people overreact. Not every phenom can maintain value. Pretty straightforward for recency bias on prospecting. So let's look at Albert Pujols. So what you're looking at here, you can see this is from April 25th, 2004 to December 31st, 2015. At December 21st, 2015, this is what Pujols' baseball reference page looked like. He had 99.9 WAR. I don't have that here, but he does. He had 560 home runs, 1,700 RBI, which is one of the most all time, and 977 OPS, 160 OPS plus. Look at this graph. His card, this is his PSA 10 rookie card. I think there's only like a couple hundred of these graded as a PSA 10. They were selling for only $65. Same as in 2004, they were going for, around 150, $65. And the reason for that is because Albert Pujols went to the Angels, which is trading teams which hurts. But on top of that, he wasn't the same Albert Pujols as 2000 to 2011. Surprise, because he aged. And that was one of the best peaks of all time in baseball history. But people were not looking towards the future. People weren't anticipating Albert Pujols to maintain any production. So yeah, his cards aren't worth anything because right now he's not good. But now we see this is where that point was, and now Albert Pujols, this same card, is worth $2,500. There's different factors here aside from the recency bias. The other factors is the fact the market as a whole has increased since then, but $50 to $2,500 is something that every single person who's been in the hobby more than 10 years, we all missed it. Probably because we weren't anticipating this to happen, but this is a very common trend for these players as they approach the end of their career. These Hall of Fame players we're forgetting about, not even Hall of Fame, all these really good players, they have their little dips as they're on the end of their career and then they spike up. Ken Griffey Jr. has a very significant significant situation, very similar to Pujols for his 1989 Upper Deck. I don't have this in this video because I've shown it before, but it's the same situation. Another example is Clayton Kershaw. This graph is from 2015 to 2019. At the end of 2019, he had 2.44 ERA, 2,500 strikeouts essentially. He was a great pitcher. ERA plus a 157. His 2019 was looked at as bad, even though he was an all-star and finished 8th in Cy Young voting. He had a 3.03 ERA, which is high for him, well above his career average. But the point remains, it was only up just a little bit. It was still only worth $56 at that point. And we see that it was worth a lot more in 2017, and it dropped in 2019 as he was still performing. But now we see again, same situation. It came right back. And this is the actual spike in 2021 in February. It really blew up again. Even though he's dropped, his card's still now worth $202. It's the same concept where because he's an aging veteran, he doesn't have the flashy, doesn't have as much Cy Young potential. And because of that, people were selling. And then he continues to perform. And not only continuing to perform, but he's getting closer to the Hall of Fame. And because of that, people are anticipating buying his cards again. So there's that little window, at least for those two specific examples, where they're not performing as well, but they're still on a Hall of Fame path. That's where you really can make your bread and butter by looking at these players and buying at their optimal time. Here's Adrian Beltre. Very similar situation. This was when he had his 3,000th hit. This was the anticipation for 3,000 hits. Once he got it, he's not a good ball player anymore. No one wants Adrian Beltre and he has 3,000 hits. And then the same situation happens, and this card is now worth significantly more. So you're seeing a trend. This is a trend that I've always looked at as a trend that will happen. It's happened with Buster Posey. Buster Posey was a really good example I should have put in here, where his cards really tanked and they spiked back just because he had a good year in 2021 and then he retired. But on top of that, you have Joe Mauer, Buster Posey, Joey Votto is a great example, somebody this happened to, which I think there's still more room on Joey Votto, and so forth. So that's a very common trend as these veterans get to the end of their career. We also have players like Nolan Arenado. I'm only going to show Arenado because he's having a very hot start to his career and because I have personal experience with Arenado. I'm never ever going to recommend anybody to buy a specific card or a specific player just because my job, I feel like, is more of education about the market as a whole and not about specific picks or anything along those lines. But Arenado, you can see he got traded right here. This was the anticipation of getting traded. This card was $102, his PSA 10 update at the time. He gets traded, it spikes, and then he performs not that great. And then it spikes again towards the end of the season because they're close to the postseason, and then it drops again. Hasn't really bounced back yet, but it makes you think of Arenado just like Paul Goldschmidt. When Goldschmidt went to St. Louis, he had a rough patch, and then he was great again. If Arenado's similar to Paul Goldschmidt, he had his rough patch last year, still 4-WAR season, and now he's going to be great again. He looks great this season. And so these are the type of players you want to target, players who are getting close to the end of their career, or players who might be having a bad season but are historically great, like Nolan Arenado, and hopes of anticipation they go up. So we've seen players who reach milestones like Beltre, then they drop. You still survive because they're Hall of Famers. You've seen players like Albert Pujols and Clayton Kershaw, players that we think don't have it anymore, but who cares if they don't have it? They're already surefire Hall of Famers, and their cards will increase next to retirement and next to the Hall of Fame induction. But we also have other factors that can help recency bias. There's buyer fatigue. We just get sick of talking about Mike Trout. We get sick of talking about Clayton Kershaw. We want to talk about Bobby Wood Jr. We want to talk about Anthony Volpe for the Yankees. That's that type of thing. We get sick of the old guys. We want to talk about the new guys. There's down years. The down years we already discussed with Arenado. I already showed him, but there's other significantly talented players in baseball right now with down years that I'm not going to discuss because I don't want to tell anybody to buy anybody that I think could have a big spike because of the recency bias. If you're historically great and you have a bad 20 games, it doesn't mean the entire first half of your career is worth nothing, and does not mean the next half of your career is going to be bad. And that's what we have. Everybody has a down year, everybody has a slump, and sometimes it's just longer than normal. Looking at the shiny new prospects does lead to this. I hope you don't think I hate prospects. I love prospecting as much as the next guy. I just don't have the funds to really put it in anymore because it's so expensive when I can find deals like I'm discussing now. But because of the new prospecting, there's such a high ceiling, so much earnings potential, but the floor is also significantly lower. People buy those in anticipation of them being amazing, and not every player is going to be amazing. We've seen that with some of the mid-2010s players. I'm not going to discuss them in too much depth, but they didn't make it and cards just drop. The floor falls out from beneath them. Then we have performance concerns. A little bit different than a down year because, Arenado has a down year last year. Let's talk about Francisco Lindor, for example. Lindor had a bad half in 2019. He had a bad 2020 shortened season, and then his first year with the Mets in 2021 was also rough. And because that performance wasn't his best, his cards are significantly lower. If he actually returns to the mean of where his career is, his cards will go back up. That's the same concept with the performance concerns. New teams also can help with these recency bias. As a player transfers to teams, we always anticipate them going up. That really hasn't been the case for a lot of players. It is at the beginning, but then the player plays for them, and if they aren't the same talent or they have this little struggle, everything is amplified and the cards drop even more. So those are some things I would look at for recency bias. Recency bias is something we all suffer from. I sold some cards this offseason because of recency bias, and I'm kicking myself for it. So I'm not somebody who's perfect by any means, but these are just some ways that I've made some money. These are some ways that I picked up some really great cards for a great deal. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.